Welcome everyone to this episode of A Story Always, in which we have the great pleasure of having with us Olivia Hill. Hi Olivia, how are you doing?
Hi, I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm pretty good. I'm a little bit tired because yesterday I was kind of sick for the whole day. Hopefully today I'll be better. But really, yes, I'm really excited to be here with you.
Great. I'm excited to be here as well. I'm a little under the weather as well. My family's a little bit sick. Also, it's a little late because we're in weird opposite times. So, but I'm
Yeah,
excited.
that's great. For those of you who are there in the chat, if you have any questions for Olivia during the interview, feel free to let me know. I'll try to keep an eye on them. And in the meantime, for those of you who don't know her, I'm going to introduce Olivia. Olivia is a novelist and game designer. As a fiction writer, she has worked in one of my favorites, the hashtag I Hunt series, which I have somewhere here. Oh yeah, there. She has worked in the Blood Flow book and the soon to be released Ultra book, which is coming tomorrow. Yeah, I have many people are really agreeing with hashtag iHunt. And she is also a RPG game designer. She has worked with White Wolf Publishing, Catalyst Game Labs, Green Ronin Publishing, Paizo Publishing, Posthuman Studios, and she has worked as a video game developer in the massive multiplayer RPG EVE Online. And as an independent publisher, she has a company called Machine Age Machine Age Productions, in which she works with her married partner, Filamena Young. Is that the correct pronunciation?
Filamena Young, yeah.
And they have released a number of books, such as Farewell to Fear, which I have there. Amaranthine, Flatpack Fix the Future, there as well. Kicking Historical Assets, and the one that we are going to be talking about today, Maschine Zeit. And in particular, the second edition that is going to come out. When is it going to come out? Tomorrow as well?
Tomorrow, yeah.
Oh, so yeah,
sooner than I thought.
That's really cool. So really great time for the interview.
Yes.
So first of all, while I send links around on the chat, could you give us a quick pitch of the game, what the game is about?
Yes. Maschine Zeit is a game about ghost stories in space stations. It is a fast-paced, brutal horror RPG that does stories like Alien, Event Horizon, Pandora. It's basically to emulate movies where people are in a place where they should not be, being killed by things that they don't understand. So it's a very good game for like one-shots, parties, that sort of thing, because it goes pretty quickly. Average game is about 2 hours, 2 to 3 hours, and it goes very quickly. Most of the players will probably die. And it is set in about 100 years from now. The world has polluted itself very much, and the people have decided to start moving up into space stations that are tethered to the Earth with space elevators. And so they all go up there. Like most of the human population goes up into these space stations. And then there's a cataclysmic event, and most of the people on the stations die. And like a lot of the stations fall to the Earth or go off into space or whatever. Then, not too long after, people start to realize when they're investigating the derelict space stations that they're haunted. But on the other hand, there is this like special metal that is a superconductor and insulator, depending on how you use it, and it basically revolutionizes industry. So there's a lot of reason to go up and go to these space stations. Some people go up to, find the names of their dead loved ones. Some of them go up to, try to bring absolution to the dead who have been forgotten, that sort of thing. There's a lot of reasons to go up, but every single one of them is dangerous and deadly. That's Maschine Zeit.
Nice. Where did the original inspiration for the game came from?
It came from movies, so like the ones I've mentioned, like Alien, Event Horizon, Pandorum, Life, at least the second edition that came out recently. Just that entire genre. That the sort of vaguely low budget horror where you have to do everything in the dark because you can't afford very expensive sets, and where the tension is done by not showing everything until the last minute, in which case you show a little too much. It's, we've always loved movies like Alien, and we felt that there was no space for horror games like that, because most of the role playing games that we played at the time were very much like adventure games, and the goal is to survive. And we wanted a game where the goal was, in a lot of ways, to die.
Yeah, this kind of aesthetic of play to die that some gamers have. What was about these movies, about this kind of survival, desperate horror that really interested you?
Well, from a game standpoint, it's different. Like a lot of times you hear people say, okay, well, my game is supposed to be like whatever movie or whatever TV show. And I look at these type of movies, and what you start with is, it's kind of funny to me because it's a lot like a role-playing game at the beginning. You start with a crew of 5 people, and they're all specialists. You have an engineer, you have a medical officer, you have a soldier, you have a pilot, that sort of thing. And it's very much like a role-playing game party. But the difference is that as the story progresses, you expect those characters to get picked off. In a role-playing game, traditionally, you can play like really hardcore Dungeons and Dragons or whatever. But in most games that you play, you kind of expect most of the people to survive, and you kind of expect the arc to be about solving the problem, not enduring the problem. And I wanted to do a game where instead of it being about winning and conflict resolution, it being about escalating everything. Making things worse and worse until you have a situation where you only have like one person left at the end.
What do you think is compelling from a player's point of view from that kind of situations, that kind of escalation?
And I'm getting a weak connection there.
Let me know if it gets better. Okay, everyone, stay still for a moment.
Yeah, I think maybe.
I'm
going to disconnect video and be right back.
Okay, this is super weird.
Okay, I lost you for a moment there. I'm back. Sorry.
Just a second. I still can't see you.
One moment. Let me see if I can fix that. Yeah, I see you on both sides now. That's weird. Give me a second here. I think, fixed it.
There we go.
Got it.
The horrors of technology.
Move the camera. I'm trying. Okay.
The camera is fine. Okay, so it seems we are back. I was asking what do you think players find that kind of escalation of that kind of horror compelling to play?
Well, I've seen a couple of times that there was a little bit of dissonance at the table because people initially, if they're used to a lot of different role-playing games, if they're used to more adventure game style play, then a lot of times they will expect that and they will try for that. but the game sort of teaches people to move past that and do the different thing. It just takes a little getting used to. And I see there was a question about, how easy it would be to teach to someone who has never played a game like this before, who has never played a role-playing style game before. And actually, in my experience with conventions, it's easier. It is far easier because they don't come in with the expectations. And if you just tell them the source material, you tell them the type of story we're telling, they just jump right in. They know, and they get it very quickly. But the way that the game sort of teaches people to play and to teach these stories is that everything is based on a very limited resource pool. And you realize early on that if you're spending all of your positive resources, all of your really good stuff on kind of silly shit at the beginning of the story, then you're going to waste yourself. Like, you're not going to have that ability to do so later. And they quickly sort of click and think, oh, okay, I get it. I can be cool now, or I can be cool later. And if I wear myself out, then later I'm dead. And so they do learn to quickly sort of enjoy the failure and enjoy the way that it goes, whether or not, it's their story is front-loaded or back-loaded.
Nice. So maybe getting a little bit deeper into that, in RPGs, horror, as you have mentioned, has been always a little bit hard to convey in RPGs. How does the system help to convey that horror, to experience that tension?
Well, my sort of experience with horror and RPGs, I've got a very long experience with it. I played a lot of World of Darkness type games. I played GURPS horror growing up. I played a whole bunch of those style of games. I played Ravenloft and things like that. And a lot of times you would have your GM or your DM or whatever, and they would have this meticulous plan. If it came out of a book or if they came up with it in their head, whatever, and they think, oh, I've got this super scary story, this terrifying thing that I'm going to throw at the players, and it's going to be awesome. And then it comes to the table, and I'm like, it's a vampire, I stake it, whatever. I've quickly learned that in horror role-playing, the scariest thing that can be brought to the table is the thing that the player brings themselves. I know how to scare me. The person to my left knows how to scare themselves. The person to my right does too. We don't necessarily all click with that, but we'll build on each other. So what the game does is it essentially empowers the player to scare themselves. You're at the beginning of the game, you sort of build your idea of what you're going to do for the story. But then as the play progresses, you start with a GM role that mostly is there to sort of foster moving things forward. But as the play progresses, that player, their GM style role, we call it a director, fades into obsolescence. They end up being basically another player at a certain point. Because the players are expected to do all of the awful things to themselves. That's ingrained in the setting. It's ingrained in the rules and the expectations for the players. You are supposed to do awful things to yourself. And if you tell players, your goal, the thing that makes you win the game is that you screw yourself over, they'll jump in. They'll do it. And that's how the game gets scary.
Cool. We have another question, which is a little bit related to what I was going to talk next, which is a little bit about the setting. Are the player characters all human? If they're human, have they changed in any way?
So there's two good answers to that. At first, you kind of expect that the players are more or less human. However, because of the weird radiation that's up in the space stations, a lot of people have sort of mutated. And so the default rules have a couple of ideas for sort of psychic power type things. We call them genotypes. And they're generally related to technology, but not all of them. It's things like some people can touch a power line and transport across the power line. It's just a thing that they can do. It's a part of their character. It's the one trick that they've got. Also, we have what are called advanced plot elements, which are what happen in sequels or what happen later in the story if your character dies and you decide to make another one. And what those are is as you have improvised things in the story and changed the sort of scope of the setting, you can adopt that stuff. So if I'm in play and I have decided, like I use one of my actions and I decide that there are aliens in this setting that exist, and they are three-headed, they're radioactive, they have purple skin. I have established that. My character dies, and if I decide I want to play another character, I have the ability to play an alien, as long as I use the established rules that came up in play.
Nice. So I'm talking a little bit more generally about technology. What role does technology play in the setting, in the gameplay experience?
So, from a technological standpoint, we like to consider our game soft sci-fi and hard horror. We like sci-fi as an aesthetic for this, but by and large, we are going for things that are broken, things that are dark that you can't see, things that are a bit alien to you, and things that aren't really working the way that they're expected. So these stations do have high technology, and the technology we establish a little bit in the setting, not much. We expect the players to do a bit of that, but by and large, the technology has failed. And so if anything, the role of technology in the setting is something that used to change our lives for the best, but in failing, it has changed it for the worst.
And so it is kind of something that the players try to rely on, but cannot anymore, that is constantly fade.
Yeah, it's broken. It's broken. Like, you might have a supercomputer on that station, but if you don't have a power line to run it, like if you don't have a generator, it's not going to happen. And if your players decide that they want that supercomputer to work, they've got to establish how that happens in play. And that's the thing that happens in that style of horror media. You might have a character who goes off and tries to find the generator to fix the computer systems. And if you decide that that's important to your story, you figure that out, you work with that. But you have to make it important at the table before it becomes an issue.
What do you think that intersection between sci-fi and horror is so maybe not, I don't know if common, but attracting, interesting, something that has been explored in the past? What do you think it has so much potential?
I think a lot of that is because horror, by and large, is about things that we aren't necessarily in control of or that we don't entirely understand. It's about the other. It's about things that humanity really likes to control the world around them. And while we make technology and we utilize technology, the advancement of technology is too quick for everyone to completely understand. I can put together a computer, but I can't tell you exactly how everything in it works. And in a way, that's kind of scary. Like, I know how to make Facebook do its thing, but I don't necessarily know how they're watching me. And in sci-fi horror, you take that to an extreme where nobody could understand even like one entire system. It takes an entire team just to make a thing. And if you have a small crew of people, there's just no way that you can wrap your head around that. I think that a lot of that comes from like the 1960s and the space race. With the space race, you have people who are put on space shuttles, and they're brilliant people. They're scientists, they're engineers, that sort of thing. But they're a small group of people who did not build the spaceship by themselves. They built it with this huge crew of people. They're put onto the spaceship and they're shoved up there. They're taught as much as they can. They're given manuals and things, but if push comes to shove, they can't fix it all. And that's terrifying. Being disconnected from the rest of humanity and unable to fix your problems, that's scary.
Yeah, it lives in some kind of liminal space between what we can control and what we cannot control, what we know and what we don't know. So
that is exactly it.
That's a really interesting space to play with. Another important aspect of the game is the survival horror, the constant threat of dying or grasping at straws to survive. How does the game convey that desperation, that tension in the player?
Well, okay, so there's sort of two layers to it. Mm-hmm. The game really only has two rules. Like on the core, it only has two rules. It's got a basic resolution mechanic, which is your resource mechanic. Your resources will dwindle as play progresses, and that's going to reflect a lot of your survival pacing, because either you suck at the beginning or you suck at the end. Either way, you're gonna have situations where you can't do anything, and you are going to be powerless. And that's a lot of survival, is that you try to take control whenever you can, but you have to acknowledge that there are going to be times where you can't take control. And you have to hope that in those cases, luck prevails. The other aspect of that is the other rule that we have, which is our sort of injury and death rule. Mm-hmm. It's contrasts the classic sort of health system in a role-playing game. And what it does is that it backloads all of your pain and your injury. You might get, for example, stabbed by a pencil. Mm-hmm. Right now, it's not a big deal, but at the end of the scene, you have to check and see if you're stable. You got to see if it went deeper than you thought, if you're bleeding out, whatever. The same goes for a gun. If you get shot, right now, it's not the end of the world. You handle your scene, whatever. At the end of the scene, you might bleed out. And that basically gives you a sort of a framed area, a framed space in the narrative to resolve that. You don't have to worry about it. While the monster is currently attacking you, you don't have to think about it too much. You just have to think about what you're doing. After the scene, we like to call it hallways and rooms. Mm-hmm. The rooms are the things that happen, the hallways are between. And you bleed out in hallways, you get stabbed in rooms. So that's basically how that works. Also, we have our injury system is sort of two-tiered. Mm-hmm. Everything has what we call a core injury rating and a conditional injury rating. The core rating is always higher, and the conditional rating is always pretty tiny. And basically, the way that it works is you compare the amount of harm that you've taken to the amount that you currently have. And if the amount that you are taking is less than the core rating for the damage you're taking, then you just go up to that core rating. So, like, it's all percentages. And a gun might be 60 core, 5 conditional. Mm-hmm. And if you get shot with a gun, if you already have 60 or more injury, it's only going to do 5. If you don't have 60, you go straight to 60. Mm-hmm. The reason for this is that in sort of dramatic space, in horror, if you get shot, it's awful. You're bleeding out, it's terrifying, it's scary, you might die. If you get shot 3 times, it's not that much different. Mm. It's that initial shock, it's that initial big, huge problem that is the important part. Then it's dealing with the bleeding, it's dealing with the shock, it's dealing with the drama afterwards that we really care about. And so that's how we frame the sort of survival element of the game. Nice.
Well, Filamena's already answered this in the chat, but there's a question about if a group could hack this game to change the setting to a fantastical horror setting or a mundane one or something else.
Absolutely, and Filamena did address it a bit in there, but for those who are just watching and listening, basically the book does have a couple of ideas. Mm-hmm. The old book, the first edition book, had quite a few rules. It was a little bit cumbersome in a few ways, but the new edition, we have hammered it down to just the basic 2 rules, which are the resolution and the injury mechanics. It's very easy to strip one of those out and put in something else. we made it intentionally easy to do that, so it was a little bit more modular. And in the book, we have 3 really great examples of how to do that. The first example is a sort of Japanese-style horror, where you are in a high school, and it's haunted. There are ghosts of like maybe fellow students or whatever, and you have to face that with just a camera. You're not doing exorcisms or whatever, you're sort of experiencing the haunting. And we replaced the injury system with sort of a psychological harm system. And instead of dying, you basically get removed from play by the adults in the scenario. Because you are maybe mentally unstable, you're unfit, you're suicidal, whatever. So you get removed. We did a one that is more of a mecha body horror, which takes it to sort of fantastic extremes in the vein of like Evangelion. Yeah. But the horror aspects of it, the crying in robots aspect of it. And so that does the same thing. It takes out the basic rules, and it replaces it with something else. And it's always really simple. These 3 hacks. The third one is, I can't remember offhand. Oh, it's the Survival Girl story. It's your classic 80s slasher movie story, where you know that one character is going to live, and you pretty much know who that is at the beginning.
The final girl story.
Yeah. Your Halloween or whatever. And the idea is that the mechanics are shifted to support that one character more, and everyone builds in to make that character awesome. And all of these hacks that we do are like 2-3 pages. They're very, very simple. Because the game rules are very simple. They're supposed to be able to be explained at the table very easily, very quickly. And if you're doing a hack, your hack has to be that way too. Like you have to be able to utilize that modularity on the fly very quickly without thinking about it too much.
Nice. That sounds really cool. The mecha one is just right up my alley.
Ours too.
So in this kind of intense survival game, where players are always on their looking at the at death in the face, how does that environment affect the group dynamics, the interpersonal relationships?
Well, one of the minor rules that we've added is that basically whenever somebody's in trouble, you can jump in and try to do something about it, and basically you give them a bit of your success. You give them a little bit of your narrative power in the moment, and then they owe you. And in a narrative sense, that means that basically anytime they're doing something cool, you can say, okay, you owe me, and you grab a bit of that. And because in these style of horror stories, in your Aliens, your Event Horizons, you always have interactions between characters where they are sort of doing give and take. And a lot of times characters die not because of their own faults, but because they're sort of trying to karmically make up for something that happened in the past with another character. Like they're trying to redeem themselves. And that's where that sort of mechanic comes into play.
How does that affect the relationship among players? Is there like it ends up being making the characters not trust each other, or builds like a trust among the players?
I've seen it go both ways. I've seen it so they foster group dynamics very well, and I've also seen it where it fosters competition very well, and I think it depends on the players. Because a lot of times whenever I'm doing it at conventions, you'll have like 2 players who know each other, and they come to the table together. And they'll quickly start helping the other players because that's sort of the expectation of the game. But they know each other, so they set up friendly rivalries. And they start basically sort of robbing each other of successes at key times in order to make the game more interesting. So it does go both ways. It'll foster antagonism, and it'll also foster camaraderie. Depends on how the players want to run with it.
Oh, cool. In the game, in the setting of the game, you talk about some machines that have been merged with human souls and have become sort of sentient, like these ghost-like things. What do they represent, and why are they so horrific?
So the trick here is, like I was saying earlier, the role of the player is to scare themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't want to say too much. I don't want to say that they necessarily mean anything other than the fact that possessed machinery and possessed metal is scary.
Mm-hmm.
Things that are sharp, things that are rusted, things that are stronger than you are inherently scary, and they give the players the tools. I think that most of the players who play the game, if you communicate the setting to them in very basic terms, they're going to immediately jump to things like the art of H.R. Geiger, for example, because he sold this genre to the world with Alien. And it's been something that's been aped a lot because it's frightening, it's terrifying. And players who have an idea of that in their mind already know how scary it is. Nobody needs to tell them. And so they're going to bring that up because it's so evocative and so sort of visceral to us. So we keep it simple. We don't really detail much about the ghosts because it can mean something different in every game. In one game, it might be that, you know, the super fucking hyper science greenhouse is possessed. And that means something different than if the cables that connect to this generator are possessed.
Yeah, I guess they act a little bit as a visual like source of horror, but also as a placeholder for the players to project their own fears.
Yeah, it's a canvas.
Nice. Another aspect of the setting that I found really interesting was that part of what these machines mean is that humans are becoming obsolete. That we are playing in kind of during the last moments of humanity in a way. Why did you decide to put the players in that environment, in that end of times? We are obsolete. We are not the owners of the world anymore. Kind of setting.
Well, okay, so I wanted to keep the setting short. Mm-hmm. I wanted to keep things very simple. And there's this old sort of adage, whenever you're writing a dramatic story, you're supposed to start in media res. Mm-hmm. You're supposed to start when things are happening, when things change. And this is a perfect time of flux because you have a situation where humanity might be obsolete. They might be dying off. Mm-hmm. You have the potential for this great desperation. You also have the potential for great hope. You also have the potential for, you know, futility. You also have the chance to rebuild and redefine what it means to be human. And there's all these great directions that you can just go. And I think that that's a perfect opportunity because it's something that if you explain it, like I can explain the setting of Maschine Zeit in a couple of paragraphs. The actual like description of the setting in the second edition book is like 2 pages. It's very, very simple. But when people hear it, they know the conflict inherently. Like they know the problem, and they inherently think of a few places it could go.
Yeah, there's this. Yeah, it's a point in time with many things are possible, and it's up to the players to decide where they go.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. By the way, they are saying that the tabletop RPG category, we could be using that one. I didn't know it was already available, but I've been waiting for it in Twitch because right now we are streaming on the D&D category, which is not exactly the appropriate one, but it's the best one we used to have.
Yeah.
So why did you decide to produce a second edition? What were the changes you have made to the game?
Okay, so for one, it's our first game. It's the first game that we published ourselves. Mm-hmm. So it makes sense that it would be the first one that we wanted to re-release. Mm. The first book, I feel like probably had the most potential out of anything that we've ever done. It's a very strong idea, and at the time that we were making it, we were very new to all of this. We had both, like, we've been designing RPGs and writing RPGs for like Catalyst and White Wolf for a while, but we hadn't made anything on our own. So when we made that game, we brought to the table a lot of the baggage that sort of held back the game. And it was sort of assumptions that we made from other stuff. The game was too big. We felt that, you know, you had to do a certain size, a certain page count in order to get people's attention. We realized in post that the game works better small. It works better whenever you're with a small group of people who are just learning it. It's great for one-shots. It's great, you know, to learn at the table. So we wanted something that could be more easily compressed. We also found that sometimes the complexity of the rules would get in the way, and they wouldn't deliver the experiences that we wanted. Sometimes they would, sometimes they wouldn't. So we looked at all of the rules that would sometimes get in the way, and it was a very hard decision to make, but we just got rid of them. We simplified the game wherever possible, so the rules are very easy to explain, very quick to learn, and also they have enough complexity that if you want to play with them, there's some ability to sort of do mastery there and do skill play, but it's not necessary to the core experience. Also, the original book was very dense on setting presentation, because basically at the time we were interested in sort of delivering an in-world document. Like, it's all presented in like blogs and like letters and things like that, which is a compelling way to tell stories, but it's hard to digest. And it takes a very long time. So we had like 100 pages of setting material, and now we have 2, and we're telling the same story, but we're doing it much quicker, and we're leaving room to do stuff later. If we want to do more fiction, if we want to expand on the setting, and we want to play with those ideas in a broader context, we can. But for now, we want to give the players what it takes to play at the table. We want, instead of an artifact that is something that exists in the world, we want an artifact that you can put on the table and it's just useful.
Great. And how has the independent publishing world changed since the last time since when you first published this game? How has things changed? Has it become easier, harder, both?
I could probably give a better answer to that in a couple of months after the game's been out, because I don't know. No, but seriously, things have changed a lot. When we first did Maschine Zeit, like a million years ago, it was like one of the first Kickstarter games, and it was back in the day when there weren't so many indie games. There were some, like there was a few things coming out of the Forge and everything, but indie games weren't a thing that everyone was talking about. Like, you didn't have, you know, Will Wheaton on a popular YouTube show with millions of views playing Fate Core. Yeah. That just wasn't a thing at the time. And so there was a different sort of, a different audience. It was all people who were sort of captive and already knew what indie games were. And then also you had people who had never played games before at all, and you were trying to sell games to those. So it was a very like wild frontier. And now, like, things have arced. Like, now you have, you know, games like Fate Core, you have games like Apocalypse World, you have games like, you know, Blades in the Dark. I know you guys are playing. And those games are really, really successful. And, like, a lot of people know about them. And if you talk about D&D, there's a chance that the people that you're talking about know Dungeon World. That's just, there's a high probability of that nowadays. And that's really fascinating to me. So it sort of changes the scope. Instead of being sort of a niche market that only appeals to people who are already into indie games, now the market is sort of all over the place. And like, there's people who are interested in all sorts of games. But on the other hand, there are all sorts of games. Like, I was looking at people who are releasing games right now, and there's like 1 million of them out. It's so cool to see, but it's also really intimidating. So I'm curious to see how that goes. I think that actually publishing them is a lot easier, just because things like Drive-Thru RPG now has print on demand. At the time they didn't. That was like fucking, we had never even thought about it. We were all doing stuff on like Lulu and stuff like that. It was not a thing that people could do. Like, most people were doing traditional print runs of stuff where you have to do at least 500 copies and pay for a warehouse to hold them. And that's scary. But now I can just upload files to the internet and people can just buy a print copy that I've never touched. And that's super cool.
Yeah. Has this new environment affected the game in any way? The way you approach the game in the physical form or anything else?
Absolutely. Now I have the opportunity to do different stuff. There was a while ago I was talking about this, but when before White Wolf changed hands to Paradox, and like all of those properties were still under Onyx Path, there was a lot of discussion in the sort of the Onyx Path developers about what to do about Vampire 5th Edition, because we all knew that it needed to happen, but we didn't know what we were going to do. And so everyone had their ideas. And my idea that I was really pushing for was to move away from like giant tome-sized books that come out like every once a year or once every 2 years or whatever. I wanted to move to a game that you could express in 60 or fewer pages and move it towards more of a regular, very, very bare bones subscription system. So you would have a 60-page core book, and then you would have like a 40 to 60-page supplement that comes out every month or so afterwards. Because I found that if you're doing 500-page books, you're only doing sort of core experiences, and you don't get to experiment much, because everything that you do is a core book or a player's guide or something like that. But with print on demand and the sort of like the Patreon models and stuff like that we have now, we can do more books. We can pay our freelancers more. We can come up with new ideas and just throw them to the wind, because it's not a big deal if any given book doesn't do well. And I think that that's a wonderful thing that is enabled by things like print on demand. If people want to just buy a PDF, they can do it cheap and easy. There's no huge investment. They're not spending $120 on a book. Back whenever we did Maschine Zeit in the first edition, it was a much more expensive process. We had to pay for a print run, and then people had to spend like $40 for a print copy. Now we're doing a smaller book that is print on demand, and it's like $20. It's $20, so people could, like, it's very accessible, but it also leaves us room to do whatever we want. If we want to do a micro supplement every other month, we can do that. It's not gonna break the bank. And so that's why the book is smaller in a lot of ways, other than the fact that, you know, we wanted it to be all inclusive. We wanted it to be a very simple experience that you could throw down at the table. Also, we want something that just anyone can pick up.
So do you have plans to release like micro supplements in the future?
Yeah, actually, we have a plan right now. We are establishing. We have, I think we're planning for maybe once every other 2 months. If this book is successful, we'll do another one. We already have a genotype book in plan, which is like more of the psychic power shit, and how to integrate that into your stories, or how to tell a story that is centered on the experience of psychic characters and weird mutants and things like that. And then we have like a couple of the factions in the setting, the people who will have very narrow, very specific reasons to go up into the space stations, and how to tell those sort of very focused stories. We have ideas for books full of hacks, like the 3 that we did in the core book, but like a whole bunch more. We have a lot of ideas, and we want to do that. If this book does well, I really, really want to make it a thing. Like, I would rather see games as a sort of a subscription, a service that is growing as opposed to a book.
Mhm.
I don't really make books. I make games, and games don't die. Games keep living.
Nice. Sounds really interesting. I look for. I'll be interested to see how it works and how it develops. Sounds really interesting. So talking a little bit generally about the game, I usually ask a few questions to know a little bit more about your design process.
Okay.
And learn a little bit about it. So first of all, what kind of experience do you want players to get out of the game after they play it? How do you imagine them?
Well, I want them to have the same experience as watching a good horror movie, which is to say that they should be a little bit shaken, they should be a little bit excited, and they should want more. They should be asking, how do we do the sequel? And whether or not the sequel happens, who knows? But they should want it. That's the experience that they should have.
Nice. And what was some issue or problem that you found during the development of the game, and how did you approach it and solve it?
Well, I think the biggest issue, honestly, was sort of overcoming our biases toward our old work. I love our games. I love everything that we've done. But to make it better, you have to change it. And sometimes it's hard to look at a rule and say, maybe the game could just do better without it. Like, it does bring good experiences to the table, but it doesn't bring the razor sharp experience that we want. It doesn't do the exact thing that we want, so let's put it aside. Taking a 200-page book and turning it into a 50-page book is like gut-wrenching. It's very difficult. And so basically what I did is I've just compiled all of the notes that people have given me from their experiences. All of the whenever people will email me and they'll say, "Oh, I played a game session. This is how it went." And any of the points where I felt that their experience wasn't ideal, that I wasn't getting the most glowing part of the experience, that part I just pushed away. I only focused on the things that delivered the heightened experience, that moment of excitement, the moment of wanting more, and the moment of sort of having questions that they want answered later.
Cool, really cool. Could you tell us a little bit, a small story from some cool moment, interesting moment, memorable thing that happened in any of your games, just to get an idea of how the game plays out?
Oh God. Okay, so when we were playing recently, we did a sort of playtest session that we streamed on Twitch, and there was a robot. Somebody in the group said that there was a robot, and I can't remember why, but I decided that the robot had multiple hands, and I didn't want them doing anything weird with it. I didn't want them reprogramming it and using its hands to solve problems. So I had to come up with something to throw in the hands, and so I decided that they were beds, that the hands were beds. And that the monster, it didn't start out as a monster. It just started out as a robot that was standing there, derelict, and it had 6 beds for hands, and it was supposed to be a nurse robot type thing, and it would transport people to infirmaries or whatever. And basically, because I was coming up with a really silly, very basic solution to a problem, later on, the players started grabbing onto that. And they started using their opportunities to bring that into play. And eventually what ended up happening is the whole experience had to do with dreams and stuff. And it didn't occur to me that that's sort of what was being built at the time. But that's the cooperative nature of the game. The players have to come up with weird crap on the fly. And so instead of just coming up with weird crap, they're going to take what already exists and just run with it. And because it's soft science fiction and hard horror, they're not expected to make everything make perfect sense. They just go with whatever's scary and weird. And so that shaped the entire adventure. Like the whole story was predicated on this weird random thing that I popped out because I was asked about a robot.
That sounds really cool. So for the spectators out there, where will be able to find the game, to purchase the game? In what platforms will be available?
You're gonna find it on drive-thru RPG tomorrow, which is actually in about 10 minutes, I think. So yeah, so it'll be by the time anyone sees this, it's going to be on drive-thru RPG. You'll be able to buy it in PDF format there. If I have a lot of demand, I'll put it up in like EPUB and Mobi format. I am working on a print version. I intend to get that done quickly, but the problem is that drive-thru RPG, you have to order a proof copy, and they have to ship it to Japan, and that takes a very, very, very long time. So I don't know when I'll have print copies available, but I will eventually.
Cool. So I just send the link to everything, but the drive-thru RPG link from Machine Age Production is there. So probably, I assume you'll be able to find it there once it goes out. So we have a little bit of time left. So if you're okay, we could talk a little bit about your other project that is coming out soon, which is your new fiction book, Ultra, that I'm really excited about that as well. So what is Ultra about?
Okay, so Ultra also releases tomorrow. It's just weird timing. Ultra is a book about conspiracies, psychics, aliens, government plots, vampires, road trips. It's a very weird book. Basically, the U.S. government back during the Cold War had this project called MK Ultra. And the idea of the project was they thought that the Soviets had psychics. And because they thought that the Soviets had a weapon that they didn't have, they wanted it too. And so they tried to make psychics. This involved things like torture. They tortured people. They gave them weird drugs. They put them through deprivation. It was awful. Very, 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 very bad. Most of the project was erased. The notes and all of the files and records were destroyed. The only reason we know about it is because 20,000 papers were randomly filed in an accounting department in another office, and someone just stumbled upon them and found these papers, and they looked at them, and they are talking about giving people drugs to make them psychic. And it's totally fucked up, totally real. So my story is about the children of some of the survivors of that program. Mm-hmm. They have psychic powers, but because the project was deemed very unethical, because it was unethical, it was more or less shut down, or at least tamped down to almost nothing. There were huge budget cuts. And so now these kids, who are not kids, they're in their 20s, they live on their own, they live amongst society, but the government is still watching them. And the government decides that they want to sort of abduct them and bring them together for some weird weapons project that they don't really understand. And so the characters in the story, the three main characters, decide to take a road trip to find out the truth about what's happening to them and basically take the fight back to the government. It's a story about three young women. One of them is basically a shut-in homeschool student in the deserts of Nevada who lived all of her life in a trailer. And she's, she can read minds. One of the characters is a weird sort of dorky goth girl living in a city very much like Los Angeles. San Jenaro, it's the city that all of my books are set in.
Oh, so it is part of the San Jenaro collection.
Same mythology.
Nice.
There's a little bit of crossover too. A couple of the characters, like Lana from iHunt, appears in Ultra very briefly.
Cool.
And then the third character is a washed-up 1990s pop star, kind of like a Britney Spears type character. except she can kill people with her mind. She was made as a government weapon to sort of mind control the populace, but the project didn't really work out, and they didn't know what to do with her, so they just kind of like let her live her life. And now she's broken and completely like can't handle the day-to-day. So these three young women basically are trying to figure out what's going on and earn their freedom from the U.S. government. And then there's aliens.
Sounds really cool.
It's weird.
What was the inspiration to write this book?
The inspiration was there's two big things. Of course, the MK Ultra project is fucked up. It's really, really, really fucked up. And there's a lot of really cool, like, sort of conspiracy media around it. Like, there are some like public service TV broadcasts in America that may or may not have existed that were relaying subliminal messages to the U.S. population. And I find those really fascinating. So I wanted to do something inspired by that. The other one, the pop star character was heavily inspired by the YouTube personality Poppy. The sort of like, yeah, she's really, really fucked up. She's like a sort of post-humanist weird art project. Yeah, that is. Yeah, pop is really, really weird and interesting. Sorry. I think we lost them for a second there. Olivia, are you there? There seems to be some connection problem. Okay. Let's give it a moment. Do you hear me? Yes. Okay. Sorry. Perfect. No problem. So yeah, Ultra is coming tomorrow as well. What's the thing that excites you more about this book? Oh my god! So it's weird. I've been doing. This is my fifth novel. Mm-hmm. My first novel was Blood Flow, which is just a straight up vampire book, and it's about things like consent issues and stuff. Then my second book was I Hunt, which is of course about a monster hunter who is poor and hunts monsters for a living, kind of, but she's still broke. And it's about poverty and about economic issues. And then there were two sequels to I Hunt that I wrote. I Hunt, a Transylvanian prince in Southern California, which is a weird take on Dracula. But it's also about poverty. It's really weird. And then there's also I Hunt, Mayhem at Movie Land, which is also a book about poverty, but it is heavily inspired by my time working at Disneyland. So these things are all like filled with these very specific social issues, whereas Ultra is mostly about the experience, the sort of weird science of it, the weird psychic weird strangeness that's going on. And I wanted it to be instead of a social theme first, I wanted it to be the weird element first. And it's not as funny as my other books. Like, it wasn't meant to be as comedic as I Hunt. So I'm excited and nervous about that because I'm doing something different. I'm doing something a little strange for me. It's outside of my comfort zone. So I'm really, really curious to see how people will like it. Great. So I don't want to take more time from you. I think so. For everyone out there, I recommend that you check both the Maschine Zeit second edition and Ultra. And I've sent the links on the chat to all the social media, drive through PDF, and all that, so you can find Olivia's work there. And if you're watching this on YouTube, everything should be in the description as well. So unless anyone has any other question, we can end the interview for today. So thanks a lot, Olivia, for being with us today. Of course. And thanks for having me. It was really fun.
Yeah, it was really exciting to have you. I'm a big fan of your books, and it was really cool to talk with you. For everyone else, thanks a lot for being in the chat, leaving comments, and it's always good to see people talk about the interview. And I hope to see you all soon. I'll be doing another interview next week. I haven't done the announcement yet, but be on the lookout on social media. And if you want to support the channel, you can follow me here on Twitch, become a subscriber, especially if you have Amazon Prime and you haven't used the free subscription. It's always a cool way to do it. You can follow me on YouTube and on Twitter, where I talk more in English, so you won't have to put up with the weird Spanish bullshit. So yeah, thanks a lot, everyone. I hope to see you all there soon. And until then, as I always say, live long and prosper. May the force be with you. And I'll see you all soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.